Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith. Winter has set in here in Western Pennsylvania, but that does not mean politicians are hibernating. In fact, so many would-be governors and senators have emerged from their dens that you need a scorecard to try to keep track of all of them. And it has not been a good month for the president and his agenda. To talk about all of this, I'm going to introduce you now to our panel, and they consist of former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. He was also the State Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania and the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Around the table, we find Jim Byrne, a former chairman of the state Democratic Party here in Pennsylvania. He also served as president of Allegheny County Council and also as mayor of Millvale for many years. Jim is an attorney now in town, Pittsburgh. As we go back around the table, we find Keith SCHMIDT. Keith's background in politics goes back to the Reagan presidency, and Keith was the state director for former Republican Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Keith was also a consultant to Santorum's 2012 presidential bid. Keith has his own consulting firm here in Pittsburgh. Seated across from the table from Keith on the Democratic side is a person I like to call the great philosopher of Around the Table, Joe Mystic. Joe is a guiding light for a lot of Democrats and has consulted on campaigns across the state. He also served in several roles in city government, including deputy mayor. Joe teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts on politics and life in the Trib. I want to thank all of you for joining us again for Around the Table and hope you're keeping warm on this very cold winter day. I'd like to start with redistricting if we possibly can. The state legislature has come up with a new congressional map as is mandated by the Constitution. The Republican-controlled legislature has come up with a map that the governor says he's going to veto. That means it's headed back to the courts to decide. So, Governor Corbett, I will pose this question to you. From your perspective as a former governor, is this the way it should be, that the courts decide the congressional districts?
First off, I really want to commend you to your reference to Groundhog Day coming up a week from today. If you've never been to Groundhog Day, it's worth going up there for one time. Is this the way it should be? No. Is it the way it is now and probably is going to be in the foreseeable future? Yes. I can go back to 10 years ago when the legislature brought forward to me the congressional map, and we took a look at it. And at that time, Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate and the congressional delegation worked together to come up with the map. We signed it. It was taken to court, and the court overturned it. We become much more divisive in the last 10 years than we were 10 years ago. And unfortunately, I think I don't see a change in that in the immediate future. So short answer is no, this isn't the way it should be. This is a political process. And people who say, well, we need to take the politics out of redistricting, that's never going to happen. I understand the need to bring balance to it, but there are certain districts that are heavily Republican, certain districts that are heavy Democrat. Each side is looking to protect their interests. So it's a political process, but it's much different now than it was 10 years ago.
You know, I agree with the governor, but the courts have always been the final arbiters of our partisan disputes. And 10 years ago, as he had described the congressional map after reaching some bipartisan agreement in the legislature, eventually went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and was replaced with what they believed was a more fair map. The legislative map also was decided at the end of the day, had to be approved by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It is indeed a political process designed to be a political process. Our Constitution calls for representation on the Legislative Reapportionment Commission of the legislative leaders of the four caucuses in the state legislature. So that's the system we have. Even these independent commissions that are designed to take politics out of redistricting have failed to do that. And by the end of the day, we're talking about the election of our public officials, and it is a partisan electoral process. So the redrawing of these districts is also partisan.
Stacy, in my opinion, the rules governing redistricting, not only in Pennsylvania, but around the country, they're just flawed. I mean, it is a political maneuver. I understand it's a part of the political process, but in the last decade or more, it's become more partisan than ever before. The fact is, I know about the court's role, but it was designed that they are the option of last resort. And in most cases around the country, they are part of the process. And the problem with that is state Supreme Courts, unlike the US Supreme Court, although people think the US Supreme Court at times is pretty political, state Supreme Courts are very partisan and on both sides of the aisle. I'm not saying that Republicans aren't guilty of this as well. And that just complicates the matter. And as far as I'm concerned, when you look around the country, especially at the congressional level, I know what the intent was, but in the end, this is an exercise to protect incumbents. And they do whatever they can in the map drawing to protect incumbents. And that's why the lower body of Congress with 435 members generally have less than 100 that are in play every other year.
Stacy, there was some bipartisan support for the maps that the governor referenced about 10 years ago, but it didn't mean that the Democrats or others thought that they were good maps. The state Democratic Party at the time, I was chairman then, was part of a coalition of plaintiffs who challenged the legality of that first round of maps that the governor referenced. The House, the Senate, and the governor's office all signed off on it. The Supreme Court at that time, which leaned Republican, thought that the maps were inadequate and sent them back. And as I recall, Speaker Terzai on round 2 brought them back, and there was another challenge. And this time the argument was, well, these maps, because you sent them back, these ones, I'm very much paraphrasing, these ones aren't as bad as the first ones. That's the map that the court went with. And we saw it again recently when the Supreme Court just a few years ago had to do the maps. But that map that the governor referenced, I recall one of the congressional districts, I think it was District 7 out in the southeast. It looked like somebody dropped a blot of mustard on the map. It was all over the place. It looked like something you see in a biology class under a microscope. It was, tentacles were everywhere. So there is politics in this. It is an inevitability you're going to have politics in this, no matter which party or which has control of the chambers or the governor's office. But it is the way we've done it. It's the way we're always going to do it. And whichever party has power is going to draw these maps. And you have the courts to try to pull a little bit of a check and balance on any overreaching.
In Texas, the Biden administration's Justice Department is talking about trying to intercede there because it doesn't like the way the congressional maps are being drawn in Texas. Should the federal government be involved in any of this?
You're running up on some constitutional issues there, I suspect. How does the Constitution read on these matters? The answer is it depends on how much overreaching is involved and whether the argument could be made by the White House as to some type of a violation that enables them to come in and have some type of legal standing to challenge it on constitutional grounds. If they can make that type of an argument, then the answer would be yes. But it really, that's not something we've talked about ever before. It's not something that I've ever, really seen much conversation about in the past. So that tells me circumstantially that whatever the heck is going on down in Texas must be so egregious that the White House feels the need to do this. And when you couple that with some of the voting legislation that's been going on down there and some of the other chicanery that's going on down in the Lone Star State, there must be some significant cause for concern for the White House to be intervening.
Well, I would hope that there are extraordinary circumstances because both of us, all four of us on this panel, could agree it's a slippery slope. If you start getting if you open that door where the federal government imposes itself in this process, it's not going to stop in Texas. It's going to be north, south, east, and west around the United States. And I think it is that slippery slope that we really, really should be concerned about.
If the federal government had not intervened in 1965, we wouldn't have the Voting Rights Act. Without the Voting Rights Act, millions and millions of Americans of color would have no say in our elections. So it's vital when one person, one vote is at stake, when that's the bottom line consideration, one person, one vote, everybody gets fair representation across the United States, is vital that the federal government step in and that the courts intervene when that's being violated.
Well,
I don't think that's the case in Texas.
Let me throw this one out to you then, Joe. The governor of Maryland, who is Republican with a Democratic-controlled state legislature, is begging if the Justice Department intervenes in Texas, he is begging it to intervene also in Maryland because he says it's just as bad there as it is in Texas.
Well, this is a system, and I was counsel to the House Democrats 10 years ago for legislative reapportionment. This is a system that is bipartisan in character at its very base level. It's a partisan process, I should say, and both sides of the legislature, both parties have an equal say, and the tiebreaker is meant to be, at least in Pennsylvania, a chairman that eventually and has consistently been appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Now, the last time the Republican majority Supreme Court appointed a Republican chair. This time, I'm not sure how Chancellor Nornberg is registered, but this time it was a Democratic majority Supreme Court that appointed the chair. So you look for fairness by virtue of the operation of the chair, because that's supposed to be the tiebreaker. And in the system, no matter how you cut it, will ever get away from politics. We talked about the congressional map and everybody agreeing the last time. Keith's right. Everybody agreed on the congressional map 10 years ago because it protected all the incumbents. And that was everyone's principal concern. Well, by the time it got to the Supreme Court and the makeup of the Supreme Court had changed, they had a different view of it. With a Democratic Party and a great majority, they had very few congressional seats where they could run a fair race and they could possibly win. And so they tried to correct that balance. This is going to go on forever. It's the nature of representative government.
All right, I'd like to move on here. Jim, I'm going to bring you back in on this one. We've talked about this before, but as the former state Democratic Party chairman, your thoughts on the large number of candidates for both governor and the Senate. So let's talk about the Senate. On my last check, I'm going to look at my numbers here. There are a total of 29 candidates, 13 Democrats, 15 Republicans, and 1 Libertarian. As I have asked before, how many, Jim, are going to be on the May ballot if indeed there is a May primary and held in May? And will you kind of handicap it for us?
Yes. Back to the groundhog analogy, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. As we get further into this cycle of petitions and signatures and caucuses and state parties convening to gather support, these folks are going to start. Some of these folks are going to start seeing their shadows that came scurrying out, to use your words, and they're going to run back into their hovels. They're going to realize that there's just not a path for them. So I think the herds on both sides will start to diminish in the next 14 to 21 days. If you look on the Republican side, for me, it's just too difficult on the Senate right now to handicap that one. I think that one's still very much wide open. But my colleagues on the Republican side may be able to give us some insight there. On the Democratic side, however, Mr. Fetterman has continued to be perceived as a front runner. I know we may be getting into this in a little bit. I think that support for him as a front runner is soft at best. I don't know that as we get closer to May, he's going to be able to maintain these leads he has, and we may discuss some issues as to why in a little bit. Keep an eye on Connor Lamb. He's sitting in a very nice spot right now. He's getting endorsements from across the state. He had a big endorsement from Philadelphia about a week ago. He's picked up some more labor support. He's picking up additional endorsements. He's doing it the right way. Connor Lamb can translate up and down the 79 corridor for Democrats, where we have been getting crushed in general elections in the past couple cycles. He is someone who can reach over to those disenfranchised Democrats. And this is not an endorsement, just a statement of opinion that we have lost in some general elections. So keep an eye on Connor Lamb, but it's still a long way to go.
Keith, you want to try to handicap the Republican side?
You give me the list of 15. You give me the biggest list of handicapped. I think it's premature to handicap that list, but I'm going to concur with a lot of what my colleague on the opposite side of the aisle enlightened you with, in that there are natural things that are going to occur that are going to narrow this field. Really, the positions that both parties take in this primary. Right now, it's not clear. I keep on contending the Republicans are not going to go to a formal endorsement. That could change. The Democrats and Republicans, if they go to an endorsement process, obviously that's a way to narrow the field. He's absolutely right. Under COVID, it's very difficult to get the amount of signatures necessary And there are going to be challenges to these signatures. So we'll see what that does to weed out the folks. And then the fuel, cash on hand. The longer this race lasts, the more people start to make decisions on who they're supporting. And once they make a decision, they don't send money to 2 or 3 people, the people with means. They start infusing the dollars into one particular candidate or another. And once your money dries up, folks, you're out of gas and you're out of the race. And probably one of the most important things that people look at, and maybe they put too much importance on this, is the end of next month or the beginning of March, you're going to see almost weekly polling being done. And people, a graph is something easy for people to understand. And if people are not coming out of the pack or polling consistently under 5%, they're going to have a long road to the nomination. And quite frankly, even the debates are probably going to start limiting who could even participate in the debate. You might have to be polling at least 10% to be on the stage. So all these factors will come into play to decide how many people actually make it all the way to the third Tuesday in May.
I could tell you this. I don't know how these races are going to turn out, but I am enjoying immensely the television battles between Dr. Oz and David McCormick. I mean, if you like this stuff, that's gold. That's political gold. This stuff. They're throwing grenades at each other every day, and I'm not sure if one of them remains standing at the end of the Republican primary. But the kinds of things they're saying about each other will make their way into the general if one of them becomes the Republican candidate.
Absolutely.
Governor?
Well, I agree with that. I mean, things have changed so much in 10 years. Frankly, the relevance of the party organization is not nearly as strong now on the Republican side, and Jim, I think on the Democrat side too, as it was 10 years ago. And you see these candidates that are reaching out, forgetting the parties and just spending money directly to the people, introducing themselves. There are other candidates that have been working the party for a long time, but when it comes to, on the Republican side, when it comes to exposure on TV, they can't afford to come anywhere near that. And I think you're going to see the same thing when it gets down to the battle between Lamb and Fetterman. Josh Shapiro, he doesn't have an opponent. He's out there, he's campaigning, has been campaigning already. So, very hard to pick this out. I agree with what Keith said about the polling. Keith, I think that polling's already started. It's weekly. And they know where it is. You have to take a look to see where they are advertising. That's where they know that they have to introduce themselves even more. And I mean, the people who are doing well are the people who are making the commercials and placing the commercials. They're doing very well.
Yeah, exactly right.
Hallelujah.
Since Joe brought this up, Keith, I'm going to bring you in on this one. If you do look at the television in the Pittsburgh area, 3 of the Republican candidates are spending a lot of money on ads, and the PACs that support them are also spending a lot of money to criticize the potential opponent. So your take on the TV battle that is shaping up basically between Dr. Oz and David McCormick, and also the counter ads by the PACs.
Well, there is, it is the war is being waged already. There's absolutely no question about that when you're watching TV in Pittsburgh and in the market surrounding Pittsburgh. The downside to a well-funded candidate is they often attack each other early and define each other early. And that comes to the benefit of everyone else in the race. If these super PACs are also attacking, they're giving cannon fodder to the lesser candidates or the people not polling as well at this time to have ammunition against either one of them that potentially survives this battle. Obviously, the goal for 2 well-funded candidates is to spend money early and knock one of the other out. But there are plenty of examples that it gets so ugly, so early, that both get knocked out. And that's a real risk here. If you define them in such a negative way and people start to form opinions that they have concerns about either one of these gentlemen's ability to lead, it could possibly bode poorly for both of them. So you have to look at that. And there's also a trade-off on early advertising. No one's paying attention, so it's harder to get a message through, but there's no one else on television. So although they're not paying attention as much, you control the airwaves. So there is a way to get money, to get a message out there, but you have to spend a lot of money. And my last point on spending a lot of money is, I think I might have said it on a previous program. I had 2 conversations yesterday, and I'm not even sure if this is legal, but there is literally, it's starting to become already difficult to purchase ads. The times are being bought up left and right, and there's even conversations about candidates marketing their time to other candidates. Whether that's even possible, I don't even know, but that came up in 2 different conversations yesterday. And I would suggest why money is so important in 2022 is it's not going to be 15 or 13 candidates, but it is going to be a crowded field. It will definitely still be a crowded field. And when there's a crowded field, it's going to cost a lot more money to get any message through because of the amount of commercials that are going to kick into gear in the last 2 months. The airwaves are going to be so crowded that whatever your budget is that you put aside for a normal campaign to put on television, you better add 30 to 40% to that budget to get the same result.
One of the significant variables, I think, that explains why we're seeing this inundation of commercials already, and even some attack pieces already, is because of the fact that although the primary on the calendar is the 3rd Tuesday in May, it's not going to be much sooner on the calendar. It's going to be much sooner on the calendar when the mail-in ballots are submitted or produced or sent out. So folks will begin the voting process much sooner than the 3rd Tuesday in May. And some of the calculus, I suspect, and what we're seeing is to get people's names and platforms and hit pieces on their opponents into the minds of the Pennsylvania voter now, ahead of the mailing or the distribution of those mail-in ballots. So, we're actually, before mail-in ballots, this is analogous to like perhaps being in April or late March. But these folks are hitting the campaign trail now. So when these folks get those ballots, they'll remember some of this advertisement and perhaps cast those votes and send them in ahead of the curve.
All right. Joe, let's move to the governor's side here. Some bad, I'm sorry, stay with the Senate side. Some bad press for the man who is believed to be leading the field of Democrats who want to become senator. Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman is being criticized for not attending a candidates forum sponsored by some Black clergy in Philadelphia. In his defense, Fetterman says he had to preside over the state Senate that day. Now, I presume that Philadelphia is extremely critical to any Democrat who wants to be elected. So your take on this, is this significant at this point in the campaign, or is it just something that I want to talk about?
No, I think there are 2 lessons here for John Fetterman. One, there's a cost of being the front runner early and for this long. And the second one is that in this race, unlike previous races he's been in, there's no place to hide. When he ran for lieutenant governor, he was handpicked. He was his patron was Governor Ed Rendell. He was protected in that race. Lieutenant governor is a kind of race where there's not a lot of exposure in any event. It was perhaps, if anything, it gave him a misimpression of what it was like to run statewide, because this is a different ballgame. This is a nationally profiled race. He has to answer for his record, and his record goes back to being Mayor of Braddock even, which is a mixed record. So if I were him, I'd be looking at where I might have some exposure from the very first day I entered politics.
He needs to toughen up. He absolutely needs to toughen up. He has not shown me yet that he has the ability to take a hit, or that he can take criticism constructively, or to show indifference. He's showing vulnerability in that regard. And Politico did a very good piece on him about a month or so ago about how he doesn't like to get into these crowded rooms of politicos and interact, how he'll stand in the back, or he won't engage, or he'll just give this impression that he'd rather not be there. Well, John, you're in the big leagues now, okay? 99% of the people in that room with you want to be there about as much as you, but it goes with it's the nature of the beast. It is the path you've chosen. So you're either in or you're out, but you have to be able to engage, go to these events, and even if you don't want to be there, act like you're having the best time of your life, because every politician in the history of humankind has had to do the same thing. And it's one of the reasons why I think he is a soft front runner. He needs to do some recalibration, and he needs to do it fast, because there's some very viable candidates that are beginning to nip at his heels.
He might be a soft front runner, but he is the front runner. It's not unexpected that people like that are going to take hits from time to time. I saw the information that you sent over about him missing the forum in Philadelphia. I'm not sure that has any legs at all. It'll be a 1 or 2 day press hit. In the end, you also get criticism when you run for a job and forget about the one you're working in currently. So it's a pretty good excuse as lieutenant governor. If there was a session day and he had work to do in the state Senate, sometimes you have to do the job that the people are paying you for before you look for another one.
You know, my friend Keith is sounding like he wouldn't mind it if John Fetterman were the candidate.
Oh
I
boy,
would
they
agree
see
with
right
that.
through me. Look how
I would
big I
agree
am.
with that.
How's it possible that you people see through me?
So, but I'm going to disagree with Keith a little bit. He made a huge tactical error in not being down with the black clergy. He just got a major endorsement in Philadelphia from the labor unions in Philadelphia. The black clergy almost equally is important in the Philadelphia region. And he doesn't go down to that, stays back and says, well, I have to attend a session. I'd love to see his attendance record at sessions, because the lieutenant governor is often not up on the podium, somewhere else. And the president of the majority leader of the party, in this case, Corman or Kim Ward, would be up there. And for him to hide behind that, I agree with Jim Byrne. He's demonstrating he can't take a hit. And boy, if you're going to be in politics, particularly statewide politics, I know what it means to take a hit. I took a lot of hits. You got to have a tortoise shell on your back and be able to go forward. And that demonstrates to me he's not a strong candidate as we would have thought a year ago.
All right, gentlemen, I'd like to move to the national side here for just a moment. We have about 2.5, 3 minutes to go. The president is returning to Pittsburgh on Friday to tout his infrastructure legislation, one of the two major items that he has been able to get through Congress, but he has been stalled on his other major endeavors. So a question, anyone who wants to jump in, please do. How is the president doing right now? Many pundits say that his presidency is faltering.
I think the American people have a true concern, and there's a certain lack of confidence in his ability to lead right now. I think they're also worried that his skill set could continue to decline because of his advanced age. But all that being said, he's still the president of the United States, and we sorely need leadership from that office. I know a lot of people are stalling to a degree right now, thinking, oh, there's a big congressional race. There's going to be leaders come out of the House and Senate and reset the agenda. That might be true, but nobody replaces a sitting president of the United States. I hope he can get his act together and begin to lead, because this country is in desperate need of leadership right now. And in my opinion, there's a pretty large vacuum in the Oval Office.
I think what it demonstrates is he's very concerned about his base. He won this state. I'm surprised he's not looking at some other state that he didn't win, but it was close in. But he's going somewhere where he's very comfortable being in that background. He's walked in our parade, our Labor Day parade, how many times, Jim? 10 times probably in the course of his career. This is almost like a second home. This is like Scranton for him coming to Pittsburgh. That's not demonstrating to me leadership, and that he's willing to go out there and put on that tortoise shell and get out there and make himself available to where he needs to go get more votes.
I think we're forgetting it's probably the risk of becoming numb to this state of pandemic that we're in. If that becomes normal to us, we forget how extraordinary it is that the United States of America is in the position that it's in, which is a pretty good position based upon the nature of our times. Our economy is better than the economies in most of the world right now during this pandemic. He got this infrastructure bill through. It's going to start to pay real dividends for America, not just political dividends, real dividends for working families. And that's a success. I think that there's something going on here that Governor Corbett pays attention to often, and that is that there's a lack of communication of his successes, of his plan. The governor talked about that with in terms of Governor Wolf during this pandemic and with the president. He has to communicate better. I'm surprised there aren't people out beating the bushes for him every day and touting his successes. But Democrats have not always been as good at that as Republicans have been, quite frankly. So
Yep.
it's a mixed bag. It's early. It's 1 year in, and there's a lot of work to be done. I suspect that for the good of America, we all should pull together and get it done.
Jim, we're almost out of time. I can give you about 20 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. He does need to have a good rebound. So come to a place where he's strong and get more assertive and congratulatory about what you've done. The COVID stimulus bill, the jobs bill. These are great things. Unemployment is down to 3.9. And 63% of Americans are vaccinated. Start there and build from there and get those numbers back up.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And I want to thank you for watching. And I hope that you join us again for the next edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith.